Hey folks, how you doing? Thought I would talk about stargazing. They called it. Some folks called it worshiping the stars, but that's the wrong idea. Because of our concept of worship, you see, it sort of puts what was going on out of context. They were actually studying the stars, not worshiping the stars in the Western way of worship. Okay? So these ancient folks who studied the stars, probably a million years ago, were called Sabians in later times. Those Sabians was associated with stargazing or studying the stars. Now, this began in Africa. Everything has its roots in Africa. Everything. So now, we will look at some events that took place where the folks could predict various things about nature, about the environment, based on stars and star movement. So we'd take Africa around the Great Lakes region, and we'd take the Nile River, okay, to help us explain this, at least part of it. That there were other stargazers all over Africa who lived. Africans lived nowhere near the Nile River, but nevertheless they studied stars in West Africa, Central Africa, and in East Africa, where we're starting off at. So at the Great Lakes region, there's a monsoon, rains come in, the Great Lakes flood, and they flow down the Nile Valley. Africa was situated on, inner Africa, situated on a plateau. And so the waters ran down to the north. So the Nile flows north due to this. Because Central Africa is on a plateau. It's higher up than northern Africa. So now, as the river flows down, okay, it's flooding, so it's flowing down. The people could look up at the sky, at the stars. And there's a star that showed every year around this time of year. That star rose up on the horizon. We'll take Fomalhaut. Fomalhaut was one of the stars. It would show up as the Nile was rising, okay, near its southern beginning, around the Great Lakes region. But as the river flowed on northward, people downstream, maybe 500 miles or so, because the river flowed for about 3,000 some miles from the Great Lake region to the Mediterranean Sea. So it traveled to 3,000 mile distance, which is not a short ways. So anyway, as the river flowed, people downstream, further downstream from the Fomalhaut folks, they would see the star rise, and another star, and this star would be Achernar, okay? And when the star rose, the people knew that soon the river would be flowing, or overflowing. And yet, the river flowed on, and people further downstream would look up and they would see the star fact. And it would tell them that the river was going to overflow its banks soon because the river was rising, okay, due to the floods in Central Africa. Then the river flowed on to Egypt, the Kemites, the lower Nile Valley. And then another star rose, and that star was Sirius, called Sothis by the Greeks. So Sothis, okay, would rise at the time the river, the Nile, flowed at its highest gate in Egypt. It's also called the Star of Isis. Isis, the goddess of great abundance, the provider, the great provider. Okay, because at the time that the star Sirius rose, the waters came in, and the Kemites, the ancient Egyptians, were in dire need of water because ancient Egypt was a desert region, and they depended on the Nile River, the waters from the Nile. And when the water came in great abundance, hence the star called the Great Provider, well, it provided the water that was necessary for food. Okay? Because they were an agrarian people, and they did a lot of farming. So now at this point, because it was so important to the people, you know what I mean, when they saw the star, they called it, at this point, when the star Sothis or Sirius rose, they called it the New Year, because they were starting off, you know, with plenty of water. They were going to do a lot of farming, a lot of planting, a lot of harvesting, so forth. So it began their year. This is in the sign of Leo. We say in the sign of Leo, Cancer, Leo. And so all this is due to, all this business about the stars is due to the stargazers. People who looked up at the sky and saw that during certain natural events, there was a star on the horizon, and that star showed up every year that these natural annual events occurred. You see? But these people were called Sabians. Now, the Sabians are people who study the stars. Simple as that. They study the stars, they called Sabians. Saba, knowledge. Okay? Intelligence. Associated with stargazing. The magicians, the magi, the three wise men were stargazers. You see? And they would take on the name Sabian, you know, by later folks. And so we can even look at astronomers today who are always gazing at the stars. They could be called Sabians. Now, Sabian wasn't a racial group, genetic group, or anything like that. Anybody who studied the stars could be called a Sabian, you see. And so we have other instances about the stars where we can look at the Cyclops. The Cyclops was a star. They call them giants. The 7 giants, you know, up in the sky. Well, we're dealing here with an entity, or, you know, a tail where the Cyclops had a eye in the center of his head. Well, that eye happened to be the pole star. Okay? And so it was 7 giants. And they all saw through the same eye, the pole star. And these are the stars of the constellation Ursa Minor, the little bear, which is still there. And so all these tales, etc., came from stargazing, the Sabians, okay? And we'll have to talk about how the stars, okay, helped in some way to influence what went on Earth. Well, it wasn't actually the stars that influenced, but the stars told the time at which certain events would take place, even with the human being, human physiology. But how is that when the stars don't have much effect, if any, on the human being in and of themselves. So we'll get back to this and we'll discuss how this influence took place, how the stars influenced the human beings. Okay, folks, I have a good one. Now we know something about the Sabians, and so who they were and whatnot, where they came from, and all that. So subscribe, and we have more to talk about, including talking more about the stars. There's a lot more to know about the stars and how they work. Thank you, folks, and subscribe and have a good day. All right, bye-bye.